the man nobody asked about. 30 days after Meridian Freight let him go, the system stopped moving. Every truck across 11 states, GPS pins froze mid-route. Warehouse bay doors sat open with nothing coming through. In the Denver Operations Center, the wall screens bled red, and nobody in that room, not the consultants Victor Hale had flown in from Chicago, not the engineers who'd been hunched over terminals since 4 that morning, could tell Claire Whitfield why. Then, buried in an error log nobody could parse, one line surfaced, a name none of them recognized. Marcus Reed. Claire read it twice before she asked, "Who is that?" 30 days earlier. Marcus Reed spent his mornings in the basement of the Meridian Freight Systems building, 2 floors below the glass walls and the good coffee, fixing a printer nobody upstairs even knew still existed. He wore the same navy polo the company issued to its support staff. No name badge beyond a first name and a barcode. He'd worked there 8 years, by the file. Almost nobody could have told you what he'd done before that. At 9 that morning, an all-staff email went out, mandatory meeting, main auditorium, 10 o'clock. Marcus went because everyone went. He sat in the back row, arms loosely crossed, and watched Victor Hale take the stage in a suit that fit a little too well for a man who'd been VP of operations for exactly 14 months. "Meridian is entering a new era," Victor said, the words smooth and rehearsed. "We've partnered with Summit Consulting Group to modernize our infrastructure from the ground up. That means new tools, new processes, and yes, some restructuring." The list went up on the screen behind him. 41 names. Marcus's was 17th. He didn't react. He'd learned long ago that flinching in a room like that was the kind of thing people remembered. He read his own name once, looked down at his hands, and said nothing. Beside him, a younger technician named Tyler Voss leaned over. "That's brutal, man." They didn't even say why. Marcus just nodded. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't come out sounding bitter, and bitterness wasn't something he let himself show in rooms where people remembered things later. Nobody explained why. No one from HR pulled him aside to talk through severance or a transition package shaped around 8 years of service. A junior coordinator dropped a folder on his desk an hour later and told him security would walk him out at noon. Renee Castillo watched it happen from the hallway outside her office. She'd been at Meridian 11 years, long enough to remember Marcus from before he'd become invisible, though she couldn't have said exactly what before meant. She almost said something. She didn't. Victor was 20 feet away, and Renee had a mortgage and a son starting college in the fall. At noon, Marcus carried a small box, a coffee mug, a photo of his daughter, a phone charger, past the security desk and out into the Denver cold. The guard at the front, a heavy-set man named Walter who'd worked that desk longer than Marcus had worked upstairs, said, "Take care of yourself, Reed," and meant it. Marcus nodded once, box balanced on his hip, and didn't trust himself to say much back. He didn't look at the building again. He sat in his truck a minute with the engine off, then drove to pick up his daughter from school early. Lily was 9, her ponytail half undone by 2 in the afternoon, backpack heavier than she was. She climbed in and said, "You're early. Wanted to see you." Is that a lie? A little bit. She studied him the way kids do when they're deciding whether to push. She didn't. That night they made spaghetti together, her stirring the sauce from a step stool, him not mentioning Meridian once. After she went to bed, he sat at the kitchen table with the HR folder and didn't open it for a long time. What the file didn't say. Renee spent the better part of the next week processing severance for the 41 names on that list. Most of it was routine. Years of service, unused vacation, COBRA paperwork. Marcus's file was different, and it took her 2 days to understand why. Meridian calculated severance by continuous tenure, tracing back to a person's original hire date. Marcus's hire date wasn't 8 years ago. It was 12. The system listed him as a support technician with 8 years in that role, but underneath, buried in an old scan folder from the company's acquisition period, sat a different document entirely. An intellectual property assignment agreement, dated 8 years back, from the year a private equity firm called Kensington Capital had bought a scrappy startup called Ironvale Works and folded it into Meridian Freight Systems. The agreement assigned all rights to a piece of software called Nexus Core to Meridian, in exchange for a settlement figure and continued employment. The listed author on the attached patent filing, Marcus J. Reed. A confidentiality clause. Standard for the acquisition barred public attribution of authorship without written consent from both parties. Renee read it 3 times, then a 4th, checking the signature against the Marcus Reed she'd just processed severance for, as if there might be 2 men with that name working the same basement hallway. There weren't. The employee ID matched. The social security number matched. 12 years earlier, a 26-year-old engineer had built the routing engine for a scrappy freight startup out of a garage office. 8 years ago, when the big money swallowed the company whole, he traded his name on that invention for a settlement check and a quiet desk job nobody would ever ask questions about. Nexus Core wasn't some forgotten side project. It was the system running the entire company, every route, every dock assignment, every load calculation. Still humming 12 years after a 26-year-old had written its first working version in a garage in Lakewood. Renee sat there with the folder open and her coffee going cold, thinking about Marcus fixing a printer in the basement while the man running operations called their infrastructure outdated. She didn't call anyone. She couldn't, the clause bound her, technically, and Victor had made it clear in a dozen small ways that her job security depended on staying in her lane. He'd said as much 3 months earlier, standing in her doorway after an audit flagged a vendor discrepancy. You process the paperwork, Renee. You don't have to understand it. She'd smiled, nodded, and hated herself a little for it. She made a copy of the file anyway, slid it into a folder at the back of her desk drawer under a stack of expired parking permits, and told herself she'd figure out what to do with it later. Later felt safer than now. Later always did. Cracks. 3 days after Marcus's last day, a delivery truck in the Denver depot pulled into Bay 11 instead of Bay 4. Nobody flagged it as more than a fluke. Summit Consulting arrived that same week with laptops, lanyards, and a deck titled Meridian Forward. Their lead engineer, a confident man named Nathan Brooks, walked the operations floor explaining how they'd clean up the legacy code base and modernize the routing architecture within the quarter. What Nathan's team didn't know, because nobody had told them, and nothing in the documentation said so, was that Nexus Core hadn't been built the way modern systems were built. It had grown organically over 12 years, patched and extended by one person who understood every dependency because he'd written every dependency. There was no design document explaining why the failover logic checked inventory in a specific order, or why certain warehouse codes triggered manual overrides instead of automated ones. Marcus had known those answers the way a person knows the layout of their own house in the dark. Nobody else did. Summit started optimizing. They rewrote the routing tables in clean modern code, deleted what looked like redundant conditionals, and congratulated themselves in a Friday status update about cutting technical debt by 19%. Nobody on the team had asked why those conditionals existed, because nothing told them to. And the one person who could have answered was 3 weeks gone and unreachable. Within a week, small errors surfaced, a shipment routed to the wrong regional hub, a load manifest duplicated across 2 trucks, a driver named Miles Carter stuck outside a locked warehouse in Amarillo for 40 minutes because the system had scheduled his delivery to a dock decommissioned 2 years earlier. A dock that, for reasons nobody upstairs could explain, still lived in the old routing tables as a valid destination. Claire Whitfield got her first flag report on a Tuesday morning. Minor. Nothing alarming. She forwarded it to Victor with a note asking him to keep an eye on it. Victor told her it was expected. You don't modernize a 12-year-old system without some turbulence, he said. Summit's already cleaning it up. That evening, at his kitchen table, Marcus scrolled a trade press puff piece about the Summit partnership on his phone, quotes from Victor about unlocking efficiency. He read it twice, jaw tight, and set the phone face down. Lily, doing homework across the table, looked up. You keep making that face. What face? The one where you're thinking about work but pretending you're not. He almost laughed. I'm not supposed to think about work anymore. I don't have one. Is that sad? He considered lying to her, the way he'd been considering lying to everyone for 8 years. A little, he said. But we're okay. You know that, right? I know that, she said, already back to her worksheet, unbothered, trusting him the way 9-year-olds trust people who've never given them a reason not to. The note. The errors kept coming, small and scattered enough that nobody upstairs connected them except Claire, who had a habit her father used to tease her about. Keeping a running list of anything that nagged at her. By the following week the list had 6 entries. She brought it to a board call, and the pressure she'd been managing from a comfortable distance suddenly felt a lot closer to her face. Federal contracts have on-time delivery clauses, board member Diane Foster reminded her, not unkindly, but not gently either. If Meridian starts missing them because of a system transition you approved, that's not a Summit problem. That's a you problem. I'm aware, Claire said. Then be aware fast. Your father ran this company 26 years without missing a single federal deadline. That's the bar people will hold you to, whether it's fair or not. She confronted Victor directly that Thursday, door closed. I want a straight answer. Is Summit making this better or worse? Better, Victor said, too fast. It's a transition period. Every legacy migration looks messy before it looks clean. He said the sentence again, like it had been focus grouped. I'll send you tonight's stability report. Send it to the whole board, Claire said. Not just me. A flicker crossed his face, there and gone. Sure. Of course. Something in the certainty of his answer didn't sit right with her, though she couldn't name what. She'd trusted Victor since taking over from her father 2 years earlier. He'd been at Meridian 14 months longer than she'd run it, and she'd leaned on that more than she liked to admit. Walking out of his office, she felt less reassured than when she'd walked in. That night, working late, she pulled up an archived recording from an old technical review meeting, part of an unrelated audit her assistant had queued. 4 years old, low resolution, mostly familiar faces. In the corner of the frame, barely in shot, stood a man in a support uniform, saying nothing, watching the room with an attention nobody else seemed to notice he was giving. She paused the video, frowned, and couldn't place why his face snagged at her. She closed the laptop and went home. The next morning, a folded and signed note sat on her desk in handwriting she didn't recognize. 7 words, ask who wrote Nexus Core originally. She read it twice. The same way, though she didn't know it yet, she'd later read Marcus's name on a screen. She put the paper in her desk drawer and told herself she'd look into it when things calmed down. Things did not calm down the break. 9 days later, at 6:40 in the morning, Nexus Core went down completely. Not a single failure, a cascade. A routing table Summit had cleaned up the week before triggered a failover sequence that no longer matched the manual override logic buried 3 layers beneath it. Once that mismatch hit, the entire national dispatch system locked into a loop it couldn't resolve on its own. Trucks already on the road kept moving on cached data until they didn't. New shipments had nowhere to go. By 7:30, the Denver operations floor looked like a fire drill nobody had scheduled. Claire got the call at her apartment, still in yesterday's clothes, and was in the building by 8. She'd never seen the floor like this, phones ringing on every desk, dispatch coordinators standing instead of sitting, a wall map of the country lit almost entirely red where it should have shown a scattering of green dots drifting east and west. Nathan Brooks and his team stood over 3 terminals talking over each other, none of them able to explain what had actually broken, only that it had broken everywhere at once. Victor hovered near her shoulder, saying words like temporary and contained that matched nothing on the screens. How many trucks are stopped right now? Claire asked, flat. Nobody answered right away. Finally a dispatch lead said, best guess, ma'am, around 4,000. Claire closed her eyes for exactly 1 second, then went to her office. By 10, she'd had enough of words that didn't match screens. She opened her drawer and found the folded note still sitting where she'd left it. Ask who wrote Nexus Core originally. She didn't call IT. She drove, tracking down an address from an old expense report Marcus had filed years back for an off-site meeting, an address that had never been updated. Lakewood, a modest street lined with maples just starting to turn. She parked, sat a second gathering whatever nerve the morning had left her, and walked up to the door. Marcus opened it in a flannel shirt, sleeves pushed up, dish towel still in hand. He looked at her, the CEO of the company that had walked him out 3 weeks earlier, standing on his porch, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "Ms. Whitfield," he finally said. "Claire. Can I come in?" Behind him, Lily appeared in the hallway, half hidden behind the doorframe the way kids do when they sense something adult happening. Marcus glanced back at her, then at Claire, and something in his face closed. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said. "The whole system's down. National. 4,000 trucks stopped on the road right now. I don't know what's happening, and nobody in that building can tell me. I heard. I don't work there anymore. I know. I'm asking anyway. You fired me a month ago without a word of explanation, and now you're on my porch asking me to fix the thing you fired me for building." His voice wasn't angry, it was tired, which was somehow worse. "I didn't know what I was firing," Claire said. "I know that's not a good enough answer. It's the true one." He looked at her a long moment, long enough that she thought he might say yes. Then he shook his head, quiet and final. "I'm sorry. I've got my daughter." He closed the door gently, not slamming it, which somehow made it worse. Claire stood on the porch a second before walking back to her car, the maples rustling overhead, the whole weight of a broken national network sitting in her chest with nowhere to go. She drove back with more questions than she'd arrived with, and one thought she couldn't shake: the man fired without explanation had been more composed about the whole thing than she was. What Renee knew. Back at Meridian, she found Renee still at her desk in the HR wing, well past 6. Claire closed the door behind her. "I need you to tell me what you know about Marcus Reed. All of it." Renee's hands stilled on her keyboard. "Why?" "Because I drove to his house tonight, and he wouldn't come back. And something about the way he said it made me think he had every right not to." Renee hesitated exactly as long as it took to decide the mortgage and the son starting college. Didn't matter as much as she'd told herself they did. She opened her drawer and slid the folder across. Claire read it standing up, sat down halfway through, then read it again. The IP assignment. The patent filing. The confidentiality clause. 12 years of a system built by one person that Meridian had, 8 years ago, quietly agreed to erase from its own history in exchange for a settlement and a desk job. Does Victor know any of this? I don't think he knew who Marcus was, Renee said carefully. I don't think that's why he was on the list. I think he was just a name in a headcount reduction Victor needed to hit a number. Claire sat with that. The idea that the man who might have saved them had been erased not by malice but by a spreadsheet nobody bothered to double-check felt almost worse. But there's something else, Renee said. The part she hadn't planned on saying out loud, the part she'd been sitting on since a vendor onboarding form crossed her desk 2 weeks earlier. Summit Consulting. The parent entity on their contract paperwork is called Fairwind Strategic Partners. I ran a background check on their principal for vendor compliance last month. She paused. His last name is Hale. Trent Hale. Victor's brother-in-law. Claire felt something settle into place, cold and certain. Victor brought in his own family's firm and signed the contract himself. No competitive bid. I flagged it in the system at the time. It got overridden 2 days later, sign-off from Victor's office directly. Why didn't you push it further? Renee's jaw tightened, not from anger at the question, but from 3 years of swallowing versions of it, because the last person who'd pushed something like that past Victor had been reassigned to the Tucson warehouse inside a month. I have a kid starting college. I'm not proud of that. You're telling me now, Claire said, which is more than most people would have done at all. She picked up the folder, tucked it under her arm. Thank you, Renee. I mean that. Back to Lakewood. She drove to Lakewood again that same night. It was past 8 when she knocked, and this time Marcus opened the door already half expecting her, like he'd known she wasn't done. I'm not here as your CEO, Claire said before he could speak. I'm here because I fired you for something I didn't do, and I let a man use your absence to profit off a contract that's now taken down an entire national system. I'm sorry. I should have known who was in my own building. Marcus studied her face in the porch light a long moment. Behind him, Lily's voice called out asking who was there. He answered without turning. Nobody, baby. Go finish your show. Then he stepped outside and closed the door softly behind him. You want me to fix it, he said. Not a question. I want to understand what's actually broken first. And then, yes, if you're willing. He looked past her toward the street, toward a city that had spent 8 years walking past him without knowing what he'd built it on. I didn't do this for credit, he said quietly. I did it because I was 26 and I liked building things. I never asked to disappear. Somebody decided that was easier for everybody. It wasn't easier for you. He almost smiled. No, it wasn't. There's more. She told him about Trent Hale, the no-bid contract, a licensing structure buried in a vendor agreement she didn't fully understand yet but that had her stomach in knots. I think Victor knew this would happen, or close enough to it. I think somebody stood to profit from your absence, and I let it happen because I didn't ask enough questions about a man I inherited instead of hired. Marcus was quiet a while, turning something over. 12 years I built that system. 8 of them I watched it from a basement, and I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit as long as it kept working. But somebody just tried to break it on purpose, for money, and use my own work as the excuse. His voice hardened slightly. That part matters to me. He looked back at the house, at the light in the front window where his daughter sat watching cartoons, unaware that the spine of a company was being negotiated 10 feet from her. I'll come look, he finally said. Not for Meridian. There's a lot of drivers out there tonight who didn't do anything wrong. Claire nodded, throat tight in a way she didn't examine too closely. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen what they did to my code. The long night. They drove back into Denver mostly in silence, not uncomfortable, just full. 2 people who'd gone in the space of a single day from stranger and statistic to something neither of them had a name for yet. The operations floor at 11 that night looked like a hospital waiting room during a mass casualty event. Too many people, not enough answers, everyone talking, nobody listening. Marcus walked in wearing the same flannel he'd answered the door in, and for a second the room didn't register who he was. Then Nathan Brooks, exhausted and out of ideas, looked up. Who's this? He wrote the system, Claire said. Give him a terminal. Marcus sat at an empty workstation, cracked his knuckles once out of habit, and started typing. He didn't explain what he was doing. He didn't need to. Watching him work was its own kind of explanation, his hands moving without hesitation through code nobody else in the building could read, pausing only to mutter things under his breath like he was arguing with a much younger version of himself. Nathan hovered for a while, trying to keep up, asking questions Marcus answered in clipped half-sentences that assumed a familiarity with the system Nathan simply didn't have. After 20 minutes, he backed off and let him work in silence, the smartest thing he'd done all night. You built the failover logic to check the manual override queue before the automated one, Nathan finally said, half to himself, staring at a chain of function calls. Why would you do that? Because automated systems fail quiet, Marcus said, not looking up. Manual overrides fail loud. I wanted the loud failure first, every time, so a human being would see it before the whole thing cascaded. He tapped the screen once. Nobody documented that because I was the documentation. That was the mistake. Not the code. Claire stayed. She pulled a chair near his terminal, not close enough to hover, close enough to be present. Around 1 in the morning she got up without a word and came back with 2 cups of coffee from the machine down the hall, set one by his keyboard, said nothing else. He glanced at it, then at her, and gave the smallest nod before going back to the screen. Hours passed that way. The room thinned out as consultants gave up and went home one by one, mumbling apologies nobody asked for, until it was mostly just the 2 of them and the hum of servers in a nearly empty building. Outside, Denver's skyline sat dark except for a handful of office lights and the red blink of aircraft warning beacons. Every so often Marcus would stop, rub his eyes, and stare at a line of code like it had personally wronged him. Claire learned not to ask what was wrong, only to wait. Around 3:30, Marcus found what he was looking for and his hands went still. "There," he said. Claire leaned in. On screen sat a block of code appended to the emergency patch Summit had pushed the week before, a licensing dependency that, once triggered by the failover collapse, would lock Nexus Core's routing modules behind an activation key Meridian didn't own. A key that, according to the file metadata, belonged to Fairwind Strategic Partners. "They didn't just break it," Marcus said slowly. "They built in a reason you'd have to buy your way out. If I hadn't come back tonight, in about 18 hours this whole system locks for good, and the only thing that unlocks it is a contract with your VP's brother-in-law's company." Claire stared at the screen, feeling something between fury and vindication settle in her chest. "Can you stop it?" "Already did," Marcus said, nodding at a line he'd just commented out. "But you're going to want this logged, timestamped, before I touch anything else." He pulled the raw server logs, the original patch file, the metadata trail, everything onto a drive Claire handed him without being asked. By 4 in the morning, trucks frozen for 22 hours started moving again, one route at a time, the dispatch board slowly filling back in with green. Claire watched it change and felt, for the first time in weeks, like she could breathe. The reckoning. 2 days later, the Meridian board convened an emergency session. 12 people around a table that had spent the last month approving budgets without asking hard enough questions. Claire stood at the head of it, Marcus beside her, out of place in a support desk polo among tailored suits, unbothered by it in a way that made the room notice him more, not less. Victor sat near the far end, jaw tight, trying to look like a man confident in his own innocence. Claire didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She laid out the timeline plainly. The headcount reduction that had, without anyone's intent, removed the one person capable of understanding Nexus Core's undocumented architecture. The no-bid contract Victor had personally signed with a firm partly owned by his brother-in-law. The emergency patch that had, whether by incompetence or design, embedded a licensing lock time to force Meridian into a far more expensive replacement contract. "I'm not accusing anyone of planning the outage," Claire said. "I think that part was an accident born of a system nobody bothered to understand. But the patch that would have made that outage permanent and profitable for a company Victor Hale has a financial relationship with wasn't an accident. That was a decision made after the fact, when the crisis was already public, to make sure it stayed broken." Marcus spoke only once, when a board member asked whether the lock could have been unintentional. "I've read a lot of code in my life," he said. "That wasn't a bug. Bugs don't come with somebody else's license key attached." Diane Foster leaned forward. "Mr. Hale, did you or did you not sign the Summit contract without putting it out for competitive bid?" "I had emergency authority under the operations charter," Victor said. "Time was a factor." "Time for what, exactly?" "The layoffs happened first. The outage happened 3 weeks later. What emergency were you responding to when you signed with your own brother-in-law's firm?" Victor didn't have an answer that survived contact with the room. He tried anyway, something about industry standard practices and long-standing relationships, but the words got thinner each time, and by the third sentence even the board members who'd liked him stopped meeting his eyes. He tried arguing that the infrastructure was outdated, that any competent modern system wouldn't have been vulnerable in the first place, that the blame belonged to whoever had let a 12-year-old codebase run unsupervised for so long. Nobody in the room missed the irony of him saying it in front of the man who'd built that codebase and been let go a month earlier. The vote, once it came, was fast 8-1, Diane the lone abstention pending her own review of the documents. Victor's employment was terminated before lunch. Legal was already drafting a referral to the district attorney's office regarding the undisclosed vendor relationship and the licensing lock, which, whatever else it was, looked a great deal like extortion dressed up as a service contract. Marcus stood at the back of the room as it emptied, watching people who'd walked past him in a basement hallway for 8 years suddenly need to shake his hand, tell him they'd always thought there was something different about him, ask if he remembered them from the cafeteria. He was polite about it, shook the hands, said the names back correctly, didn't linger. Claire found him by the elevators. "You didn't have to stay for that part," she said. "I wanted to see it land." He considered her next question honestly, the way he considered most things. 12 years is a long time to not exist in a room. "Does it feel different existing in it now?" "Ask me in a month," he said. "Right now it mostly just feels loud." Down on the operations floor below them, the dispatch board glowed steady and green, hub after hub, the whole country's freight moving again in a rhythm nobody but Marcus fully understood, and for the first time, nobody had to pretend otherwise. After. The offer came 3 days later, delivered in person rather than by email, which Marcus noticed and appreciated without saying so. Chief Technology Officer. Full authorship credit on Nexus Core, retroactive and permanent. The old confidentiality clause formally dissolved. A seat, if he wanted it, on the technical steering committee that would decide how the company handled its next decade of infrastructure. Marcus didn't answer right away. Sitting across from Claire in her office, an office he'd never once set foot in a week earlier, he turned the folder over in his hands without opening it. "It's not about the title," he finally said, "or the money. I need to know this doesn't happen again. Not to me, and not to whoever's in that basement in 5 years that nobody bothers to ask about. I can't promise a company never makes a mistake like this again," Claire said honestly. "But I can promise you're not going to be the mistake anyone quietly buries this time." "That's a big promise for a CEO who's had the job 2 years, Marcus said, not unkindly. "It's the only kind worth making." He thought about that long enough that Claire didn't fill the silence, which he noticed too. "Give me a few days," he said. "I've got someone at home I need to talk to about it first." That night Lily sat on the kitchen counter while Marcus made grilled cheese, swinging her feet, peppering him with questions he mostly dodged. "So you built the whole computer thing? The one on the news? 12 years ago. Before you were born. That's basically forever. Feels like it some days. Are you going to be famous now?" He laughed, flipping the sandwich. "I don't think fixing a server makes you famous, Bug. Grandma said it was on the local news." "Grandma exaggerates." Lily considered this with the seriousness only a 9-year-old could bring to grilled cheese logistics. "Are you going to take the job?" "I don't know yet." "What do you think?" She shrugged, the universal gesture of a kid who trusted the answer would be fine either way. "I think you should stop hiding just 'cause it's easier. You always tell me that." Marcus looked at her a long moment, spatula still in hand, something loosening in his chest that had been tight for 8 years. "Yeah," he said. "I do tell you that." 6 weeks later. 2 weeks after that, Marcus walked back into Meridian Freight Systems through the front entrance instead of the loading dock, wearing a collared shirt and no barcode badge, just his name printed clean on a laminated card, Marcus Reed, Chief Technology Officer. The transition wasn't instant or dramatic. It happened in small pieces, a standing Tuesday meeting where people actually waited for him to speak instead of speaking over him, an email signature with his real title on it, a decision to keep his old basement desk exactly as it was, not out of sentiment, but because he liked the quiet down there to think. He and Claire found their rhythm slowly too, the way two people do when neither wants to rush something that survived a national outage to get there. It showed up in small things. A dinner that became a standing Thursday tradition, Lily included, because Marcus wasn't the kind of man who separated his daughter from anything that mattered to him. Lily, for her part, decided within the first month that Claire was fine, I guess, which from a 9-year-old was closer to a blessing than either adult let on they understood. It showed up in a hallway one evening in November, both of them staying late reviewing a routing update, when Claire reached over without quite deciding to and laced her fingers through his, and he didn't let go, and neither of them made it into something bigger than it needed to be in that moment. Neither of them mentioned it the next day either. They didn't need to. "The system's been stable for 6 weeks straight," Claire said, looking at the dispatch board glowing steady on the floor below. "Longest stretch in 2 years, according to the old logs." 12 years, Marcus corrected. Quiet. It was always stable. Nobody just knew why. I do now, Claire said, not looking at the board anymore, looking at him instead. Marcus caught the look and let himself hold it a second longer than he might have a month ago. Down the hall, a cleaning cart rattled past, and somewhere below them a driver in Ohio radioed in an early delivery, one small green dot on a map that no longer needed anyone to explain why it was moving. Down on the operations floor, the trucks moved on time, hub after hub, across a country that had no idea an entire freight network had once hinged on a man nobody thought to ask for a name. Above it, in the glow of monitors that finally matched the quiet confidence of the system underneath them, an entire infrastructure had stood for 12 years, held up by someone nobody had ever bothered to ask about.